You're on Vision Christian Radio. Neil with you, the Wednesday edition of 2020. And, hey, we're going to explore some really important and I think fascinating things over this coming hour. And I do want to invite you to join into our conversation. Shortly, we'll open our talkback lines. You might want to have your own say and you might have your own thoughts about the types of things we'll talk about, because we're going to talk about sport and we're going to talk about your own aspirations, whether it be in business, whether it be in family, community, whether it be in any of the elements that we live in our lives. But when we think of sporting success, it's easy to think that the focus is purely on the preparation of the athlete. Now, what we might be talking is physical preparation and mental preparation. But a deeper conversation today about a third dimension. And our special guest today recognises there must be more to coaching people than performance alone. He says there's a crucial third dimension, a spiritual dimension, especially valuable for coaches and leaders to understand, who are shaping the thoughts and identity and the purposes of those who are emerging leaders and even sporting champions. And if a third dimension is important for the champions of the sports field, perhaps there are some takeaways for all of us, whether sporting champions or those of us aspiring to live a life that counts for a kingdom purpose. So our special guest over this coming hour, Shaun Hart, is back with us, a genuine AFL legend of the game. He played his best years as a Brisbane Lions player, 3 times premiership winner. That's no mean feat. And also one of those wonderful accolades, Norm Smith medalist in that first grand final he played back in 2001. These days he works with the football program at Bond University in 3D coaching. Shaun Hart, special welcome along to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be with you, and great introduction. Really good summary, I think, of what we'll talk about, and certainly what's really pressing on my heart in terms of helping leaders and coaches be the best they can be.
Let's talk about 3D coaching. I mean, you know, some of us are familiar with 2D. When we're watching a typical TV screen, it's two-dimensional, and someone puts some special glasses on, you've got a 3D image, all sorts of things like that. What's 3D coaching?
Well, ultimately, 3D, three-dimensional, refers to our being. We are body, mind and spirit. Bible says body, soul and spirit, of course. Body, mind and spirit is what most of us will know, and most of us, the language we talk. And yet it seems like a lot of what we talk about or focus predominantly on is body and mind, and particularly in sport. Particularly we focus on the preparation, as you said, of the athlete and the performer and his or her physical attributes, tactics, skills, those sorts of things, what we would put into the first dimension of sport and of coaching sport. And those things are very much connected to the particular sport. So they'll change, the attributes will change according to the sport that you're trying to prepare an athlete for. The second dimension is the other key element that we've moved significantly into in the last 20 years in the sporting realm, and that's the psychology of sport and the mental side of sport, and helping athletes deal with anxiety and pressure and that fear of failure and those sorts of things. So in that dimension, we talk emotions, confidence, motivation, team cohesion, goals, those sorts of things, and that's predominantly where the focus is in the sport. But there's an element of the reality that if coaches can understand, leaders can understand, we are three-dimensional beings. The third dimension of that is the key dimension. It's the epicenter of who we are ultimately. It is the heart and the spirit is what we call the third dimension, and it contains 6 elements, and I'll throw them out there just early. I know we'll cover a little bit of it, but identity, purpose, value, self-worth, character, and significance. Those 6 elements are enormous in terms of building a foundation for a person where ultimately the performance can be the outcome that comes from getting that part of the person, that part of the being right. And just to finish that thought, we like to say that by definition, to neglect any one of those 3 dimensions of the being is to not help a person reach their full potential.
And in this day and age, which is so much more secularised than it's ever been, and some say it will be a deepening secularising, if you don't have your own appreciation and understanding of spirituality, and that's a very general term. And honour to you. You've been so open with your Christian faith, even at the peak of your sporting career, and you never sort of fall short of being able to declare your own faith in Christ, which is such an important element. But if you don't have this sort of idea of spirituality, you haven't got much of a hope to understand this third dimension, have you?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the reality is the third dimension is also caught up in faith and belief, and where does a person put that ultimately? Because you can certainly in the second dimension think about what you believe, but ultimately my reality for the whole idea of anxiety and pressure and mental challenges for athletes is that not too many of them solve them purely through just thinking differently, just getting a mindset change necessarily. Yes, there's certainly some help that sports psychologists will give, but I believe that the foundation of that person is so much more caught up in issues related to how they see themselves. Who are you? Like, what's your identity? What's the purpose? The purpose beyond the sport and the win or the loss, the performance of what you're doing, because they're the things that, whether we win, lose, fail miserably, we don't reach a goal, they're the things we can keep coming back to that give us a foundation to continue to persevere, to continue to overcome, to continue to actually stand strong when others might be even speaking negatively to us, but we can stand on a foundation. Athletes, every person needs that type of foundation to be able to come back to. So we need to help people understand who they are, purpose, those significant key things we believe are contained in the third dimension of a person's being, the epicenter of who they are. And when people can understand those things and find the truth of those things for themselves, and then the true identity, the true purpose that their life's about, we believe that they have a foundation for their best performance, their personal best, as we like to say as well, but also just to be great leaders and to understand what's happening, the circumstances, work through those, and to be successful no matter what.
Off on a little tangent here, and we'll keep some sport at the centre of our conversation, and for others who want to take that deeper, of course, this has got application way beyond that. But when we're talking about sport, and the thought that I had was, when you've got you might even be a kids' sports team, but someone from the community, so we could be talking about communities, whether it's in our capital cities or regional centres or even small country towns, sometimes the sports chaplain actually brings that dimension, because it doesn't just sort of magically appear. It's got to come from somewhere. So that person who might be a sports chaplain, and they're responsible maybe across a whole lot of different age groups and different levels of sport in their town, are they bringing that sort of dimension, do you think, just by their presence and the sorts of things they might contribute?
Without a doubt, Neil, there's no doubt for me. My personal story, I won't go into that, is definitely has been influenced by the role of a sports chaplain in my sporting career. But I think that's the reality. That's a great picture of what a chaplain brings into a sporting organisation is what I would like to help coaches and leaders understand. They need to carry themselves. They need to possess themselves so that they can also have an understanding of each of the dimensions of a person and how to actually build strategies in their leadership and in their coaching of people to help people in every one of those elements, every one of those dimensions, I should say. And so as a chaplain comes in and brings all of those things, and clearly a chaplain is far more positioned to be someone who are confident to people, someone who gets outside of the performance arm within sport and business, whatever it might be, but helps people journey really well so that they can be performers within there and deal with some stuff. But I think, chaplains would come in and they would be incredibly valued of the person first of all, their value as a person first of all, their life, their family, all those sorts of things. I don't think there's much of a shift, to be honest, to help coaches and leaders focus there. My desire, though, is to help those who come in with a real performance lens, leaders who come in with a real performance lens, let's say a first dimension lens. It's all about skills and getting our people to achieve results, thinking too much about results as key instead of actually the final piece of getting people right in their mindset and people right in their heart and their spirit and their identity, those sorts of things, because we believe putting the second, third dimension together, doing great leadership in that space produces people who then are able to be confident enough, deal with the emotion, the pressure, and perform at a high level consistently.
And, this third dimension comes into focus, doesn't it? Because, as you say, you can just have the coach and they might be, employing all sorts of great sports psychology and training an athlete to perform well on the sports field. But this has been part of your story too, just to bring this in, because there were times in your own career where you were performing at a high level on the sports field, but behind the scenes you were battling all sorts of things to do with identity and purpose, and really even, bringing out sort of depression in your own life. Give us some thought here about how this third dimension works with the way that we actually see ourselves as being valuable.
Yeah, really good. I think for me, and if I keep it personal, a bit of personal story, not too much, but just a little bit, I think hopefully the listeners can understand. I found, in as quick detail as I can share, I found in my journey, when I came to a really dark place, I discovered that I was building my life and in my purpose and my whole identity on becoming a famous and successful footballer. That's what it was. That was, but in essence, if I think of that, that's just a goal, to be honest. That's just a goal. I'm trying to get to a goal, if you know what I mean. But for me, it was purpose. It was identity. It was everything. It was everything. And so, in anything we do, we can have such a focus on performance that when we don't perform, all of a sudden our world can crumble, or if we feel like our leader is just caring about transactional, we say, just caring about what I'm producing, right, then all of a sudden the pressure can be on and we don't feel like there's a relationship. There's no internal motivation to work for that vision. But when we shift that, and for me, I had to understand that actually my identity and my purpose is not in football ultimately. That's something that I'm blessed to be able to do, and I'd love to be able to do it really well. And my goal is to become a successful AFL player ultimately. But trying to live in that as my full identity, my whole purpose, when it started to collapse on me, all of a sudden my whole world collapsed, and that was the reality. That's what took me into a really dark, depressed place for a good 6-week period in my career. And so for me, it is that can be for anyone childhood trauma. It could be something that's just gone on in the family while a sports person's trying to make their pathway. So how do you deal with those things properly? Because if you just try to deal with them in the mental space and then get a person back on track so they can perform, how do we deal with those things? To be honest, I like to say to people that the reality of a lot of the trauma that happens that currently is dealt with in a mental health microscope, I believe most of it is connected to things like identity, things like purpose, things like self-worth. Things that people are getting attacked on social media, attacking their self-worth. It's attacking their heart, their spirit, the center of who they are. And yes, they can get some help in the mental space with that, but ultimately they need a foundation that they can stand on that helps them overcome those things that I think are really. So in other words, the third dimension elements, I believe, are a lot of the root cause of the mental health battles.
And having a grounded Christian faith enables you to address some of those really important foundations for your life.
There's no doubt. That's personally where I was able to get led to be honest. I was helped by a chaplain and by my wife in a really dark time of my life, and to really stand on a true identity, a true purpose beyond performance, and from, literally from there and from that support I've been given, and my passion ultimately through my own story is to flip a narrative, because sport and life can become so much about trying to reach a performance-based identity. So in other words, the performance is coming before the identity arrives, right? We've got to get to a place, we've got to achieve something before we can get security and identity in who we are. But my passion is to flip that narrative and to flip it and to make it identity-based performance. So put the identity, put the person first, which is what we always should do, always have to do. Get the person right and the identity right of the person, and that will eventually become performance. So flipping that narrative, performance-based identity to identity-based performance.
Shaun, let's talk how this works in practice. What are your thoughts here? Because the role of the coach or the leader has to go beyond what you said was just like a transactional thing. I might turn up for the session, and that's all that there is to it. What goes beyond that? What do you say to people to say, what does this look like in practice if you're bringing this third dimension?
Yeah, so in three-dimensional coaching leadership, we talk about developing, creating strategies to capture the hearts of people. We talk, again, heart and spirit, third dimension, to capture the hearts of people and to lead people ultimately in that dimension, certainly in the second dimension. And certainly we want people to be leaders and powerful leaders in every one of the three dimensions. Practically, that's a great question, Neil, because for me, that strategy that, if you talk to people, if I talk to people, people go, well, tell me about something that you do that makes a difference in that dimension. So if I talked about a strategy, I might talk about the spotlight drill, for instance. And the spotlight drill is something we actually did with a group of 60 young people at a school leadership summit in Victoria last week. And so we asked them to get in groups of 4, and we demonstrated to them how we would put one person in the spotlight, right, on a seat. So they're the spotlighted person, and we would ask them to speak into that person, so to speak personally to that person, to let that person know what character they see in that person and what they love about that person, whether it be their friend or just something they've seen in them, to actually speak into that person, not to talk about their performance, but to talk about them as a person. Because in our culture in Australia and in sport, we love to have a joke and pull people down, but this incredible power of encouragement, as we talked about, and to sit and to listen to some of these young people as high school students start to do that and start to speak life into each other and speak and help people see maybe what they didn't even recognise in themselves is just so powerful. It creates tears. It's what I would call one of those vulnerable positions that we just don't go to enough. But three-dimensional leaders, coaches, learn that there's incredible power in that. There's incredible power in capturing the hearts of people, and then you get deep connection, deep trust, and then you can have the conversations you need to have about with people that set them up for great performance in the future. So that's the little strategy. I've got a friend, particularly Cade in Canberra, a coach, a pastor down there, and a leader down there, and he implements strategies like that and other things. Particularly, we do it at Bond, of course. I'm building that. Only 1 year at Bond, so I'm going to keep building on some of these strategies. But in Canberra, Cade's been doing that for many years, and some of the stories of transformation in the life of people, because we're stepping into the lives of athletes. We're stepping into the lives of the people we work with. We're not just meeting with them daily, talking about performance, talking about where we're trying to get to. That's it. Surface type relationships. We're doing deep relationships. We're doing life together, not just business or sport, but there's a bigger picture for why we're together. The people who are prepared to go to that level will capture the hearts of people, and they will transform lives. They'll be transformational leaders, transformational coaches, and that's what we're passionate about creating.
We're not used to having people examine our character and look for the good things. Most people are very quick to find the bad things in our character.
Easy to say.
So if you identify the good things, and then, as you say, you speak into that person's life, it's a little bit aligned, I think, and I'm just sort of bringing a biblical thought here, the blessing of God. And it comes through the lips of someone. If it comes through the lips of the coach or the leader or your friends, something actually does transform in the relationship. And we actually then have a special bond with the person who's actually saying those nice things about us.
Yes, incredible, isn't it? Like, we talk about funeral topics. So do we wait for a funeral to tell people about what was special about a person? Is that the first time we actually say what we should have said 100 times when we walk past that person or when we work with that person? And we also like to say, if you walk past someone and you don't say it, it doesn't count. So say it. We want people to be able to learn, to be able to say things, say the right things to people. Yeah, you've got to be able to have the challenging conversation sometimes, the conflict sometimes. Sometimes that's really healthy, but certainly this whole idea that people... So Neil, if we think about that, the reality of what's happening in our businesses and our sporting clubs, where people are anxious and a bit insecure because they don't know what people think of them. But imagine they do know what people think of them. Now, imagine they do understand that, wow, is that what you really see me? I never would have thought that people would think that about me. Sometimes it's interesting. At the end of my career, I got some incredible feedback from coaches and players about how I impact and influence them. I didn't get it. Sorry, I did get a little bit along the way, but not much. And other players would be the same. I'm not saying that as a negative to me, but I'm just saying imagine we continually uplifted, encouraged, celebrated one another. My goodness, all of a sudden our identity is going to be stronger. Our self-worth, our value is going to be stronger. We're going to be like a rock. When those waves come at us, we'll be fine. We'll just charge through there and we'll continue to perform because we're standing on this foundation that's being established, not just by the people around us, but just by the way we speak into ourselves as well. We start to have language about ourselves that's different. It's not shame. It's not guilt. It's not all this stuff that's negative, but it's actually the stuff that, again, that ultimately I know God intended it for us to have in our heart and in our mind.
Slightly off topic, I read an article just this past week. It was about husband whispering.
Ooh.
As I say, this is a little off topic, but in some sense here, oftentimes even within a marriage, you've got one partner bickering, arguing, finding every fault with the other. And the essence of this article, and I don't think it was even a Christian article, but it was about saying those things which will reinforce the value of your spouse, and you will see your marriage transformed. Now, that's a very simplistic way of saying it, but I think there's something of a similarity. So even when we're talking about the sports analogy and how this works in sport and raising up champions, it's going to work across a lot of dimensions of our lives, the way we speak into people's lives. Let's take a call before news. Heather is in Hervey Bay in Queensland. Hi, Heather. Welcome.
Good morning, Neil. Good morning, Shaun. So good to hear you both again. I just say Shaun followed every game and thoroughly enjoyed it. Still a Brisbane Lions supporter. However, in this conversation, I really, really believe in what you're doing, and to take it back to a biblical context, it's sort of like the change between Saul and Paul, that God had to change Paul so his identity gave him his purpose.
Wonderful insight, Katie. What are you feeling about that sort of, that Damascus Road experience, Shaun?
Exceptional. What a great example. Totally, it's perfect, really. You've got a great comment and just a great thing to ponder on the reality of the way God operated with Saul to Paul. It's dynamic. Yeah, called him to his true mission, his true identity and his true purpose, his true mission. Well done. That's outstanding.
Hey, just before we take another call, and we've got a caller just waiting patiently, but Shaun, young people today, growing up in a certain style, atmosphere in this generation, and where they're getting their value from oftentimes is not those biblical Christian foundations we're liking to talk about. They're getting it from other sources, and they're jumping on the bandwagon with all sorts of different identities. What are your thoughts for young people today?
Well, certainly, what a great thought. Social media and media generally, and just what they're feeding themselves these days, this generation, certainly is defining for them who they are, their identity in all sorts of ways, and their value and their self-worth, and whether it be positively or oftentimes negatively impacting those things. I think my simple thought is that our greatest endeavour to help young people find a true identity, find their true identity and purpose in life is so significant, because it's only when they can stand on an identity and purpose that is solid, it's a rock ultimately, that they, as I said, that they can withstand what the world's throwing at them these days. And sadly, if we do look at social media, we look at suicide statistics, and I don't want to, but the reality is it's a pandemic. Talk about pandemics, epidemic. It's a pandemic in our world, in our country, and in our world. What part of that is to do with the attack on the identity of people? The bullying, which is an attack on the identity of a young person, or any person, to be honest, and a young girl potentially takes her life. We've heard that story. What's the attack on someone's, who knows, race, whatever it might be, online, social media, that then causes someone to feel devalued, to spiral out of because of an identity attack. It's enormous what's happening for young people these days. Hence why this whole area of identity. Identity is an identity politics battle going on, to be honest. Yes. Reality says, but we won't go into that. But there's so much happening in that space. Anyone that there's either confusion or there's conflict, or there's just a need to be able to really help people start to think about, what is my true identity? Why am I here?
And when we come back to a biblical foundation, our Christian faith, even Genesis chapter 1, we're made by God, created in his image, man and woman. We have intrinsic value because of that very sound principle. If we're looking at identity, that's a place to start, isn't it? Just the very first chapter of Genesis.
Powerful starting platform, very powerful.
Taking calls, 1800 316 316. Let's hear from Katie, who is in Nil in... where is Nil again,
Country
Katie?
Victoria, is it?
Country Victoria.
Yeah, it's an hour from Horsham.
Wonderful. I had a mental blank there for a moment. Hey, Katie, what are your thoughts?
Hi, Neil and Shaun. Privileged to speak to you both. And sorry, I don't know much about football, and pardon the pun, but what you're talking about is my heart. This is my subject. Sorry, that I'm not a coach. I'm trying to restart my business, which I've called up about before, and I'm about to do that with the Lord's help. But my heart is to help young girls. I'm a very late bloomer. I'm 53 years old, and I've had a pretty hectic life. But I started a business a few years ago, actually at the start of COVID, and I went from zero income to, some weeks I was, on my own working online, $3,000 to $5,000 a week.
Wow.
And I found my identity in that business, but I had some personal problems. I had stuff going on at home. My children's father had passed away also at the start of COVID. I was helping one of my children, and I found, because in the Opal industry, I thought I was making friends, quote unquote, if that makes any sense. And then when I was helping my son and I started to struggle, this was last year, people started, I don't know if it was a coincidence, but people put out videos, started trolling me online, and I just lost the plot. And so it's been a year. A lot of stuff's happened between now and then, but my heart is also to help young girls, because I was dealing with 40 years of PTSD, which I've now started to deal with. Because if I had not had my identity in Christ, because I didn't really have any support at home or anywhere, I've had to be like David and encourage myself in the Lord. If I did not believe that Jesus loves me and has a plan for my life, I would have just given up.
Katie, I think you're sharing some golden wisdom here.
Beautiful.
Shaun, your thoughts for Katie?
Yeah, again, that's why I use the word leadership, Katie, because it's significant. We are all leaders. We all have a leadership influence, whether that be small or enormous, and I can sense yours is growing and about to explode, to be honest, as you start to step into a call into a space that you can speak intimately into. The other thing I wanted to say is that you mentioned I'm not a coach. I just I love to encourage people that this is the simplicity of great coaching for me. It's the ability to ask great open-ended questions and be an incredibly good deep listener. Those two skills, if you can do that, you don't need a certificate to say you're a coach. You can become an incredible coach. And I want to say to you, I believe that's what God will call you into in this season, that you will be able to do those two things to young women and help them truly find their identity and the pathway that God wants to put them on as well. So awesome. It's incredible just how your story speaks directly to what Neil and I have just spoken about.
Katie, while I've got you here, Shaun, speaking into people's lives, by asking the right questions. Sometimes we think we've got to know all the answers to be a coach or a leader. It's identifying the right questions. So, for Katie, and, she's speaking into the lives of these young women. What sort of things do you think, might just bring out the best for Katie as she's thinking about these young women that she's speaking into?
You mean in terms of questions?
Yeah. So, is there a sort of a life dimension?
Yes.
Is there a aspiration for your career, for your future, for, the relationships you'll have?
Yes.
The questions you might ask.
Coaching or leading, let's just use both those terms, is obviously an ongoing opportunity. But for me, I think the initial part for Katie and her story is that she would be able to be vulnerable at the right level initially to be able to help speak the truth of her journey into a young lady who would then be able to go, okay, now I can connect with your story, understand that you can have some empathy for my situation or my what I'm going through. That then, as I like to say, vulnerability begets vulnerability. Like generosity begets generosity, vulnerability begets vulnerability. So as we open ourselves and our own story and share, other people feel confident that because we've been vulnerable, they can be vulnerable and trust. And from there it becomes, I think, it's the ability to deeply listen that Katie will, I'm sure, she sounds like she's just got that heart to listen. And then she will be able to resonate with that story and find a way to be able to ask the question that most likely she has herself understood about her own journey. So that, because the great question part is that people need to be able to discover their story is not the same as yours. There's similarities, but they need to be able to discover and speak out of, in other words, answer your open-ended question, speak out of their experience by answering that question. As you listen, you'll hear something that they say that you go, well, I wonder if I should then ask this question, so that they can speak more about it, so they can unpack what they haven't unpacked before. Because as they unpack it, as they share it, as they're vulnerable, that deep connection happens, and they start to work through that situation, and you help them walk in faith out of that situation. That's what I think will happen.
Katie, thank you so much for calling in. And 1-800-316-316 if you'd like to join in our conversation. And just very quickly, I've just farewelled Katie, but she did say, with her new business, some weeks, $3,000 to $5,000. And you feel good in those times, but then there'll be a week where the sales are very thin. And, you can be crushed by things that when it's not going so well. This is where identity is so powerful too, Shaun.
Yeah, very good, Neil. Yeah, absolutely, because it's not all rosy. There's ups and downs. There's things that just are going to happen all of a sudden. Even in the last week, about a note from a friend in Adelaide. His wife all of a sudden went in for the removal of of gallbladder, and has had shocking complications in that, and has been on life support because of that. So this is a lady with a couple of young kids and that, and you just that's a traumatic situation. There's what you're talking about is that a day might not go well in business, whatever it might be. There is so much that might happen, but again, that's why it's prevention of the mental health stuff that people deal with, but ultimately it's actually building people the way they're intended to be built, on the right foundation. That's ultimately what this life should be about, and the leadership and the coaching we give people should be about. And I think that's the story there, that we need to just change our perspective. Instead of having such a performance focus, make sure that's the last piece. We talk about outcomes, and we talk about a process of building people so that the performance, the personal best, can follow.
Let's take another call. Rodney is in Adelaide. Hello, Rodney. Welcome along.
Yeah, g'day there, guys. Lovely to be on the radio talking to you.
Lovely to have you on, Rodney. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, Shaun, what you're doing is so closely aligned with the work of Roy Godwin, who wrote a book called Blessing. We will bless them. So many books about blessing. And when we're speaking affirmation to people, generally what we don't want to be doing is just coming out with nice things that's like rubbing their back and saying sweet nothingness that don't mean anything, but really pressing into God and, okay, Lord, what do you want for this person? What are your desires for this person? And being able to share them and bless them that they can fulfill their godly calling. And it's beautiful what you're doing, and I think that's exactly what you're tapping into.
Yeah, fantastic. Shaun. Yeah, I think it has to be authentic. You're right. There's no doubt. And when we do that spotlight drill, as I said, sometimes there's an incredible emotion that flows. It's real evidence that it's authentic, it's genuine. It's something that someone's probably almost been holding on to for a while. They have walked past and not said it, but being able to break the awkwardness, but actually help people and facilitate people to say something really authentically, really personally. That's the transformational, it's a transaction from spirit to spirit, heart to heart, but it's a transformational activity that happens instead of, like you said, just doing something, saying something, trying to make something up. It's actually needing to be authentic, but it's a blessing, and I really appreciate it. I'll go and have a look at that book. I thank you for that lead.
Rodney Hall. Rodney, what was the name of the book again, just for listeners who might be wanting to jot that down?
Look, he's written a number of books, but the one comes to mind immediately is The Way of Blessing.
Wonderful.
He's made a whole lifestyle of it.
Yep. Absolutely fabulous, The Way of Blessing, and there'll be a number of books that will be about blessing. I had a guest on just recently who was, his whole ministry is about blessing, and so you might want to search for that on the app. Hey, Rodney, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316. We might have time for another call or two. Hey, Shaun, let me ask you, when you're trying to reposition yourself, understanding your identity. And, for listeners who've listened to our conversation, they'll be thinking, yes, Shaun is saying, need to have my identity in Christ. But if I'm really going to be honest with myself, my identity might have been shaped by all sorts of strange factors, very worldly factors, worldliness, aligning with some of the victimhood that gets around with identity politics that we sometimes talk about. Building on what the world might offer, we will say it, and sometimes, we want substance to it. Building on what the world offers leads to destruction. Finding that narrow way that leads to life is where we're really wanting to be. Any thoughts here about building on right, firm foundations? Yeah,
I think it is. I think it's the word you used, sorry,
repositioning.
Repositioning, thank you. I thought it was. I was going to say that, and I thought, is that right? Repositioning. Yes, there's definitely, again, that process has probably always started with a reality that I want to sit down and I want to think through this stuff, because I think most of the time we just continue to live for the day and we don't really sit and think about the big questions of life. Why am I here? What's my purpose? Where am I going? What's today about? What's this year about? All of those things. We don't probably do that enough, but the reality is that we lost my train of thought. We just help me again.
When we're talking building your life on the worldliness,
thank you.
Leaving that 3 dimension to the side.
I'm back.
And saying I'm all about money.
Yes.
It might even be greed. I wouldn't call it that. There might be all sorts of other dimensions to the things that I'm going to build my life on. It's going to be trampling over others to get to the top and the corporate ladder.
Very good. I was going to add the thought of circumstances as well, and those things that happen to people and those things that can define people. A marriage breakdown can impact a person for their whole life. I know a friend that it did, as if they're a failure because mum and dad didn't stay together. Those sorts of things can be trauma that creates identity. As you said, within the world there is literally who knows how many things we could try to find our identity in, whether it be today or for the next month or the next year or our whole life. We can try to find our identity in a whole lot of things that the world offers. But ultimately, I know personally, many people know, that's why it's so important to be able to sit down and actually take a really great look at who am I? Why am I here? And actually define your identity and get clarity on that. Because if we continue to go with a fragile identity or no identity at all, or just grab onto this thing today and this thing tomorrow, little joys here and there, we're going to find ourselves in that spot, that place of being lost, which I've been in before, that place of being broken, which I've been in before, that place of being empty, which I and many athletes have been in before. In fact, 20% of athletes will suffer a mental health challenge in their reality in their life, as well as society's probably very similar. So it's because we are not building our lives on identity and purpose, those significant things. We're just trying to find it in all sorts of other ways within the world.
We'll come back to that 20% of athletes in a moment, but let's squeeze in one more call. James is in Kyabram in Victoria. Hey, James, welcome along.
G'day, Neil. G'day. Just thinking about the prodigal son. So the prodigal son could be wearing a dress these days, or the daughter could be dressing like a son. Still prodigal. And I'm so appreciative of that because God's calling me deeper into a prayer thing. But, just thinking about the fact that he's put eternity in everyone's heart. He has placed eternity. So it's God's desire. Like, there's no children in hell. There's no children in hell. All the children are in heaven, so they can be Iraqi, they can be wearing a dress, they can be throwing missiles, they can be doing that. But if they're a child, they're going to heaven. And the prodigals are out there. We just got to keep praying for them. They need their identity. I hear that. So, but he came back to his senses. Luke 15:17. He came to his senses. Thank God for the senses, eh? What do you praise him for our senses, that there is another sense, the sense of eternity.
He remembered how warm and how good it was at home when he was eating out of the pig trough. There's something special, I think, in there to talk about how we actually build these foundations into our children so that when they're going through how they're forming their identity and running off into worldliness, that they might come back to that thing that they know is strong. Any further thoughts for James from you, Shaun?
Oh, James, so good. I can't remember who talked about Saul to Paul, the lady early. I've forgotten the name. I'm sorry about that. But the reality for me is how amazing you put those two together. Both of them rogues, right? Both of them rogues at one stage, like we all are. And yet the love of God ultimately is the defining piece that defined who they truly were. The love of God calling Saul to Paul, and there's the prodigal son or the daughter, all of that same story, the love of God, knowing the true identity of that person instead of the story, the backstory of that person. But so powerful because ultimately, I know we find identity in that place, deep in the purpose we're created for, the love that God has for us. Well, guess what? No need to go searching for any more identity, that's for sure.
James, thanks so much for your call. We'll put a line under any more calls now. Just to quickly come back to a point you made. 20% of sports people, and maybe we're talking professional level, elite level sports people, are suffering some challenges around mental health. I'm not sure where that statistic comes from, but that would mean that, say, 1 in 5 really need something of an extra foundation, something of this new 3 dimension that some might not even be so familiar with. They need that to be able to actually survive, even to reach their aspirations in sport. And then beyond that, to reach, for all of us, the rest of us who are not sports people, to reach the aspirations that we might have, to be a kingdom-oriented person. But 20%, that's a significant number of people, particularly in sports, Shaun.
Yeah, significant but not surprising, Neil. For me, that statistic, I should say, predominantly comes from the study of Olympic-level elite athletes, right? And their stories. There's an article written and a number of stories written about the different athletes and their experience and what sports are in. It's cross sports as well. But the reality is for me that I don't have the numbers, the statistics of local sport and stuff, but I'm convinced, because I've operated there and because of the stories I hear, that it's no different. It could even be worse, to be honest, Neil, because I was at Port Adelaide Footy Club for a number of years, and what I heard there about a 15-year period, that's a footy club, the Port Adelaide Magpies, over 75 years, literally won a premiership every second year. And yet multiple premiership players. So you can imagine some have won 6, some have won 7, some won 4 or whatever over that period because they just kept winning over that 75-year period. But over a 15-year period, 5 of those players took their own lives. And you go, well, yeah, so, and then even I like to talk and share with the young leaders about Michael Phelps. 23 gold medals. There's a picture of him. You can check on YouTube. Picture of him. On Google, and 23 gold medals around his neck. But you know what? He's been in that dark place 3 or 4 times himself, questioning who he is and what his purpose is. Fortunately, a friend of his gave him Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life book, and that has been so significant in helping him actually, as his friend said to him, mate, you're too goalful. You need to be understanding a bit more about being purposeful. So it's helped him get on a pathway where he's won so much, he's had so much success, but he finds himself empty, lost. Who am I? What's this all about? How does that happen? But for me, it's a common story throughout, not just sport, throughout our world, and we need to understand ultimately what is underneath that. And again, I come back to that point that it's what we regard as the mental health pandemic, and yet I've got no doubt that just about all those issues are rooted in the third dimension elements. They're rooted in identity, in purpose, in self-worth, in elements like that. That's where I believe majority, if not all of it, emanates from those issues. So we need to really have a look at that, in my opinion, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to lead in that and to start conversations around how do we lead, how do we coach people in those so that we build foundations that people never have to enter into that zone.
Undoubtedly, there'll be someone listening saying, where do I start? I don't even know God. I don't even know the Jesus and the Christian things that you're talking about. And my suspicion is that it has to start with that encounter. As we were talking about the, Saul, who became known as Paul, the Damascus Road experience. Someone's thinking, well, where do I start? It obviously starts with getting a relationship with God in place and then beginning to understand what he intends for our identity. So there's a process here. There's a growing, isn't there? But it starts with putting your faith in Christ, discovering who God is, and that actually has a good plan for you and not a bad plan. These sorts of things. For people who are wondering where to get a start here, what are your thoughts, Shaun?
Yeah, Neil, it's so powerful. What you just said then, you want every person who's listening to absolutely understand and believe. Now, I know there's a lot of your listeners are going to be going, yep, Neil, it's perfect. Exactly what you said is exactly what I know. There's going to be a heap of listeners that I want to speak to right now who are going to listen and go, what? I don't get that, Neil. I'm listening, I love your station, but I don't necessarily get that. So what I would say to them, and I hope this is okay, what I would say to them is that ultimately what Neil's just talked about is it's in relationship that we will truly find our identity and our purpose. It won't be in the things of this world. It won't be in the achievements, the do. It'll be in the who. And the who of our life is in our relationships. But that's where you should start looking. If you're not certain of what Neil's just said, then it doesn't really make sense to you because you're not a person of faith. It's in the who. So ultimately it's in the who that you're doing life with. And it's who, again, sometimes I like to say it's who we belong to. It's a funny term, I know, but it's who we identify with. Who we identify with. So start there. Start your search today to find out who you truly are and come to a point where you are understanding that's my identity, that's my purpose. Because if you start that, if you're not understanding at the moment and you're listening, you start that journey, but you start it with a relationship idea that my life is about relationships, then I think you'll find yourself in the place you need to be sometime very soon.
Start with the who, not with the do. And you might be at a point sometime where you're going to say, well, whose side am I on? And that identity will come when you choose one side or another. Wonderful words of wisdom. Fabulous stuff. Shaun Hart. And Shaun, let's do this again sometime soon, perhaps in the new year, because there's so much more to explore. And I know listeners won't mind hearing some more of this amazing wisdom. Shaun Hart, three-time premiership winner with the Brisbane Lions, AFL legend of the game. He's been our special guest these days. He currently works with the football program at Bond University on the Gold Coast in Queensland in 3D coaching. To connect with Shaun, there is a website. It's about identity sports. Here's the website address, idsports.com.au. idsports.com.au. Shaun, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your heart with us today on 2020.
Pleasure, Neil. Yeah, my number's on there, so please give me a call. Love to chat.